The Mad Hatter was no stranger to the strange, the absurd, and the supernatural. He had encountered all kinds of creatures that lurked in the night, but the invitation he received on a damp, foggy evening in Savannah, Georgia, was unlike anything he had come across before. The letter, sealed with wax and delivered by a courier who disappeared into the mist before the Hatter could ask any questions, contained a simple, yet chilling message. Come to the Midnight Carnival. Your presence is required. The Hatter turned the letter over in his hands. The paper was yellowed with age, and the ink had faded but was still legible. There was no signature, no hint of who had sent it, but he knew that such things were not to be ignored. He could feel the supernatural energy emanating from the parchment, a clear sign that this was not just a trap. It was a challenge. According to local legend, the Midnight Carnival was a traveling show that appeared in different towns precisely at midnight. It was said to be a place where impossible things happened, where nightmares came to life, and from which those who dared to enter never returned the same. Some called it a haven for the damned. Others believed that the carnival was controlled by a dark force that fed on the souls of its visitors. The Hatter had heard whispers of the carnival during his travels, but this was the first time he had been invited directly. He didn't hesitate. Adjusting his wide-brimmed hat, he set off through the foggy streets, his boots making almost no sound on the cobblestones. As midnight approached, the Hatter arrived at the edge of Forsyth Park, where, before his eyes, the sprawling carnival appeared out of nowhere. The air was thick with the scent of popcorn and cotton candy, mingled with something more sinister. A hint of blood, a whiff of fear. Brightly colored tints adorned the area, their fabrics fluttering in the cold night breeze. A strange, unsettling music played, performed by an invisible orchestra, its melody both captivating and unnerving. The Hatter passed through the entrance, pushing through rusty, creaking gates adorned with flickering lanterns. The carnival was buzzing with activity. Masked stilt walkers, clowns with unnaturally wide grins, and fire breathers who exhaled flames that seemed to burn with an otherworldly light. Yet, despite the apparent merriment, there was an undercurrent of unease. The visitors, those brave enough to come, wandered the grounds with vacant stares as if they were hypnotized or lost in their own nightmares. As he moved deeper into the carnival, the Hatter couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't just the performers and guests who eyed him with curiosity and caution. There was something else, something hidden in the shadows. He approached a large tent at the center of the carnival, its entrance guarded by two imposing figures dressed as jesters, their eyes glowing red beneath their masks. The sign above the entrance read, "Shadow Show, one night only." The Hatter knew he had to go inside. He walked past the jesters, who silently stepped aside and entered the tent. Inside, it was dark, with only a single spotlight illuminating a small stage in the center. Rows of empty seats surrounded the stage, and despite being alone, the Hatter felt that he was not. The silence was broken by the sudden appearance of a figure on the stage. A man, dressed in the coat of a ringmaster, with pale skin and dark, empty eyes, smiled at the Hatter, his teeth sharp and gleaming. "Welcome, Hatter," the ringmaster said, his voice smooth as silk. "We've been expecting you." The Hatter remained silent, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. He had encountered enough demons to know that this was no ordinary man. "Who are you?" the Hatter asked, his voice calm and measured. "I am the host," the ringmaster replied, bowing theatrically, "and tonight, we have a very special performance for you." The lights in the tent flickered, and suddenly, shadowy figures appeared on the stage. Vampires, their fangs bared, their eyes burning with hunger. The Hatter's hand tightened around his dagger as he prepared for battle. The ringmaster raised a hand, and the vampires froze, their snarls turning into sinister smiles. "Ah, but this is no ordinary fight, my dear Hatter," the ringmaster said with a chuckle. "You see, this is a trial, a game, if you will. Each of these creatures has been chosen to challenge you. If you survive, you may leave the carnival. But if you fail, well, let's just say the carnival gains a new performer." The Hatter's eyes narrowed. He was not one to back down from a challenge, especially not from a creature like this. Without another word, he lunged at the nearest vampire, his dagger flashing in the dim light. The vampire dodged with inhuman speed, but the Hatter was quicker, slashing through the air and landing a blow that sent the creature reeling. The fight began. The vampires attacked in waves, each more ferocious than the last. The Hatter moved like a whirlwind, his dagger cutting through the darkness, his movements precise and deadly. But as the battle wore on, he realized that these vampires were not just ordinary creatures. They were illusions, distorted versions of real beings, created to wear him down, to test his limits. The Hatter fought with all his might, using every trick, every skill he had learned over the years. He spat at the vampires, his saliva burning them like holy water, and they shrieked in pain, dissolving into nothing. But no matter how many he defeated, new ones seemed to take their place. When the last of the vampires fell, the Hatter stood in the center of the stage, breathing heavily, his clothes torn and stained with blood. The ringmaster clapped slowly, his smile never wavering. "Bravo, Hatter, bravo!" he exclaimed. "You truly are a master of your craft. But the night is still young, and the carnival has many more surprises in store for you." The Hatter sheathed his dagger, his eyes fixed on the ringmaster. "What do you want from me?" he demanded. The ringmaster's smile widened. "I want you to entertain my guests, to give them a show they'll never forget. You see, this carnival thrives on fear, on the thrill of the hunt. And you, my dear Hatter, are the star of tonight's performance." Before the Hatter could respond, the tent filled with the sound of applause. The empty seats were now occupied by ghostly figures, their faces hidden in the shadows, their hands clapping in unison. The ringmaster bowed once more, then vanished into the darkness, leaving the Hatter alone on the stage. The applause grew louder, more intense, until it became a deafening roar. The Hatter stood his ground, his mind racing as he tried to figure out what to do next. He had survived the first act, but he knew the night was far from over. With one last look at the shadowy audience, the Hatter turned and stepped off the stage. The carnival awaited him with all its horrors and secrets. But the Hatter was not afraid. He had faced the darkness before and was ready to do it again. As he stepped out of the tent into the cold night air, the carnival lights flickered and the music played louder, more ominous. The Hatter adjusted his hat and strode forward, ready for whatever the Midnight Carnival had in store. The Hatter moved through the winding paths of the carnival, his eyes scanning the ominous shadows that seemed to follow him everywhere. The music, piercing and unsettling, echoed in his ears, heightening the sense of impending danger. He knew that ahead of him lay something far more significant than a mere illusion. There was a real force behind it all that needed to be defeated. Passing by tents with signs promising astonishing wonders and impossible sights, he came across one that stood out from the rest. The sign on it read, "Cursed mirrors, see your true self." The Hatter paused, feeling a strange pull. This was a place where trials were not just physical. Here, they tested the soul. He knew he couldn't pass by without taking a look inside. Inside, the tent was dark, almost pitch black, but the Hatter could still see the mirrors lined up along the walls. Their surfaces were covered with a thin layer of dust, and each step the Hatter took sent small clouds into the air, adding to the atmosphere of abandonment and decay. Yet, despite this, the mirrors were clear and clean, reflecting his image in every pane of glass. As he moved closer, he noticed that in the mirrors, his reflection was not as it should be. He saw himself, but not as he was, rather, as he could become. In one mirror, he saw himself with blood-red eyes, pale skin, and fangs, as if he had become a vampire. In another, he saw an old, weary man, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the battles he had fought. In a third, he appeared as a young man, terror etched on his face as if bracing for an unimaginable horror. The Hatter understood that these were not just images, they were possible paths he could take, futures that could be his if he allowed the darkness to take hold. But he was not easily frightened. The Hatter approached one of the mirrors, his gloved hands clenching tightly, staring resolutely at the distorted version of himself. His reflection froze, then began to move on its own. The Hatter's reflection smiled at him, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" the reflection said in a voice that was both the Hatter's and not his at the same time. "So much blood, so many souls lost. Do you really think you're any better than the monsters you hunt?" The Hatter's eyes narrowed. He knew this was a trap, a trick to unnerve him. But he had seen too much, experienced too much to let it affect him. He would not give in to fear or doubt. "I am what I am," the Hatter replied calmly. "I do what needs to be done. If that makes me a monster, so be it." The reflection laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed around the tent. "You think you can fight the darkness? It's already inside you. You're just like us." The Hatter's reflection began to change again, this time morphing into a creature of pure darkness, its form shifting and changing, tendrils of shadow reaching out toward him. But the Hatter didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial of holy water, smashing it against the mirror. The glass shattered with a sharp, piercing sound, the fragments scattering across the ground, and the dark figure dissolved into nothingness. The other mirrors followed suit, their reflections cracking and breaking as the illusion was dispelled. The tent around the Hatter began to collapse, the darkness receding as if driven away by an unseen force. He stepped outside, back into the carnival, the tension in the air growing thicker. The music had changed, becoming even more chaotic and distorted, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel. The Hatter knew he was getting closer to the heart of the carnival, to the source of its power. He had passed 2 trials, one physical and one mental, but he was certain there was more to come. His instincts told him that the final confrontation was near, that the true master of the carnival was waiting for him just beyond the next tent. Taking a deep breath, the Hatter adjusted his hat once more and continued forward. The final act was about to begin. At the edge of the carnival, the Hatter came upon a massive, ancient oak tree, its branches gnarled and twisted, stretching up into the foggy sky like the fingers of a dying giant. At its base, a small wooden door had been carved into the trunk, adorned with strange symbols and runes. The Hatter recognized them as wards, meant to keep something either in or out. Without hesitation, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was a dimly lit chamber, the walls lined with shelves filled with jars containing all manner of grotesque things, animal bones, preserved insects, and things he couldn't identify. In the center of the room stood a single figure, a woman, her back turned to him, dressed in tattered, ancient robes. The Hatter's grip tightened on his dagger as the woman slowly turned to face him. She was old, impossibly old, her face lined with deep wrinkles, her eyes milky white with blindness. But despite her appearance, there was a palpable aura of power emanating from her. She was the true master of the carnival, the one who had summoned him. "Welcome, Hatter," the woman said in a voice that was both soft and commanding. "I've been waiting for you." The Hatter remained silent, his eyes never leaving hers. He knew that this was the final test, the ultimate challenge. "You've proven yourself time and time again," the woman continued. But there is one final task you must complete before you can leave this place. You must face your greatest fear. With a wave of her hand, the walls of the chamber began to dissolve, revealing a vast, endless void. The Hatter found himself standing on a small, narrow bridge suspended over the abyss, the only light coming from a distant, flickering star far below. The woman vanished, leaving him alone in the darkness. The bridge began to sway, and the Hatter could feel the weight of the void pulling at him, trying to drag him down into its depths. But he stood firm, his eyes fixed on the star below, knowing that it was the only way out. As he took a step forward, the void began to whisper to him, voices rising from the darkness, each one a memory, a regret, a fear. The faces of those he had failed, those who had died because of his actions, appeared before him, accusing him, blaming him for their fates. But the Hatter did not waver. He knew that these were just illusions, tricks meant to break him. He had faced his fears before, and he would face them again. With each step, he grew stronger, his resolve hardening. He would not let the darkness win. As he reached the end of the bridge, the void began to fade, the whispers growing fainter until they were nothing more than echoes. The star below him flared brightly, and the Hatter was enveloped in its light. When the light faded, he found himself back in the carnival, standing before the ancient oak tree. The woman reappeared, her expression unreadable. "You have passed the final test," she said. "You are free to leave." The Hatter nodded, knowing that he had won, but also knowing that the price of victory had been high. He had faced his darkest fears and come out the other side, but he knew that the shadows would always be with him, waiting for another chance to claim him. Without another word, he turned and walked away from the carnival, the fog closing in behind him, obscuring the tints and the lights. The Midnight Carnival was gone, leaving only the memory of its horrors. The Hatter didn't look back. He had survived, and that was all that mattered. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the carnival would return, that it would find him again one day. But until that day came, the Hatter would be ready.